Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode, number 47, is 3 genius ideas. I've shown you one before and you liked the content. I found 3 more, so I'd like to share them with you. We will not have an opinion section today because the whole episode is my opinion. But before we get to it, I'd like to review the story of why I started my YouTube channel. I had been walking on the treadmill and don't like commercials on TV, so I started watching YouTube videos. And of course, my interest being quilting, those are the videos that I was watching. And day after day after day, I saw things that were being taught on these YouTube videos that I totally disagreed with. I thought there were better ways to do piecing and cutting and making certain units, that I have decided to share that content with you. Hence, the YouTube channel was born. My goals in this channel are, first and foremost, good sewing and piecing techniques. Second, good cutting techniques. I see every day people using cutting techniques that are not efficient or accurate. Really big on my list, no unnecessary waste of fabric. Unnecessary, underlined twice. Why? Because there's plenty of necessary waste, and that ends up in my scrap heap. I don't want any unnecessary waste in my scrap heap. An example of necessary, in my opinion, is I love to use stripe binding on the diagonal, stripe fabric, on the diagonal for binding. And when I do that, I have to use a larger chunk of fabric than I would if I cut just straight across. I don't mind putting that big chunk into the scrap pile because I got the desired effect I wanted for my quilt. On the other hand, an example of real unnecessary waste is making flying geese with the rectangle plus 2 squares method rather than the no waste method. In an earlier video, I told you that I had done the math on a not very big quilt that used flying geese units. And in the no waste method, you used 2 yards of fabric. And in the rectangles and squares method, you used 3 yards of fabric. A whole yard wasted. Now, people will say, oh, those little triangles that get cut off, they're not wasted. They get put into the scrap bin to be used in another quilt. Well, first of all, I have enough in there without adding anything I don't need. But then, too, you have to figure out a use that will use those half square triangles. Not always easy. So that's a big goal of mine, as little as possible into the scrap heap. And then the last item, ways to use the necessary waste. I'd like to show you ways you can take those leftover pieces and make some absolutely beautiful quilts with them. Not what I think are ugly mishmash, throw everything, including the kitchen sink, in it. I like to have some unifiers and some color combos that you like. If you find this kind of content worthwhile, please share my YouTube channel with your quilting and sewing friends. I'm trying to spread this information as far as I can. And remember, the content is all free. We do release our videos on Monday mornings at 7 a.m. Central Time, and I hope you will enjoy this episode and all the ones in the future. Let's see some genius ideas. The first genius idea I'm going to bring to you today was from Tracy from the Sewing Channel. And you may wonder why I have this Elizabeth Hartman quilt behind me. And the reason is this plaid or check fabric. It was a motif fabric from several years ago, and it was not printed straight on grain. So if you look at this closely, which I don't think you're going to be able to see on camera, but I'm going to show you on the piece of fabric on the table soon. There's a little, like a half a check here at the top on the left. It's totally disappeared by here. And then it does the same thing over and over across. when someone in the shop wants to buy a check or a plaid, and they're people who are a little bit particular and want everything nice and straight, I always remind them that most of the time they are not printed straight. So if you cut straight, the check or plaid will be crooked. So the sewing channel that I watched the other day, unbelievable, Tracy came up with the greatest solution for not straight printed checks and or plaids. Now, this is the exact same fabric as the one behind me, just in a different colorway. But if you look closely up here, you have a full square here, and then a little bit of the brown to the right of it. And as you go down, that whole little sliver disappears, and when you get down to here, you have about a half of a check. So you have a whole check plus some extra up here and a half of a check down here. It's definitely not straight. Tracy came up with the best solution ever. She decided to put it on the bias. And she took a ruler and laid the ruler out to the size square that she wanted, lined lines on the ruler straight, and then she cut one square by one square. So let's see, I've got a big enough here for a 4-inch square, and I've got the 4-inch line right on the angled line, and then she just went and cut. And then she did this over and over again, and she ended up with perfectly cut squares in a different, actually in a different angle than was originally intended. But it absolutely worked out perfectly. It's a little extra work, but boy, oh boy, is it worth it if you want everything to come out straight. So that is my first genius idea. Let's see if I get that little bit cut. So now everything's straight. The next thing I want to show you, I saw in a Ricky Timms video, and he was interviewing a woman named Maria Schell. And behind her was some quilt blocks, and they barely talked about it, just briefly mentioned it, that she'd taken a shoe fly block, which this is your shoe fly block, and then she cut it into quarters and inserted a stripe. Now, she may have made her stripe. She may have pieced strips of fabric together and cut it. I couldn't quite tell from just watching it. In my example, I just used a striped fabric. But boy, oh boy, that little thing, a little stripe, and I just put a little pop of red in there for fun, makes this block look entirely different than this block. And I thought, boy, what other blocks could we do that to? And after I show you this one, I'm going to show you some blocks that we rejected doing it to because it doesn't make any sense. I thought, oh, my whole world is opened up. Well, it became much more difficult to find more blocks to potentially use it on than I thought. So we made an uneven 9-patch, did the same thing, cut it into quarters, and added the stripe. And this time we just used the same light green. You can decide for yourself if you like the matchy light green or you want a pop of a different color. I think this makes this block way more interesting, but I think it's less successful than this one. Now we had a few that I thought about that really weren't going to work. And the first one I thought about was, why not do an hourglass? That would be a fun one to do. You could use a 10-inch square, make an hourglass, cut it apart. Well, here's an hourglass. And if you cut it apart here and here, what do you get? You get 4 half-square triangles. There's no reason to make the hourglass if you were going to put a sashing of a stripe in between, you would just make 4 half square triangles and put the sashing in between. Then I thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun to do a sawtooth star? So I thought about that one. And here's a sawtooth star, and if you cut this in quarters, what do you end up with? You end up with this, which is just a 4 patch that's made up of 2 solid squares and 2 half square triangles. So this one didn't make sense to me either to do it. But I did come up with a couple others. I don't know if any of you have block books. There's several of them out there that you can just page through and find different individual blocks. It's not quilt patterns, it's just block patterns. And they give you different sizes that you can make, and they give you the measurements for the different sizes. So I found a few I might try. But I really like the effect, especially of that shoe fly. For sure, I'm going to try a churn dash. But that's it for this genius idea. I have to change the boards for the next one, so I'll be right back. My last genius idea for today is from Deb Tucker. Surprise, surprise. I think everything she does is genius. But this is her Diamond Rex ruler. And this unit, you can see here, it's this unit. People have made it using 2, you can call them V-blocks or triangle and a square, peaky and spike, whatever you like to call them, but then you have the extra seam here, and that just, is another thing to match and more work, and it also interrupts the diamond fabric. I've also seen it recently done with foundation paper piecing. And here we go again with the waste and the not putting things into the scrap heap, and efficiency. When you have a way to do something that's regular piecing, where you cut your pieces the right size, you're not going to have very much waste. When you use foundation paper piecing, you have more waste and you have more work. So to me, if you can do a traditionally pieced way, you're far better off. And with Deb's ruler, all you do is cut a strip the prescribed width for whatever size diamond you're going to do. You follow the instructions, and the only real waste you're going to get is this first angled cut to get but to get the correct angle for the diamond. And then you just keep cutting across, and you don't have any extra waste there in making the diamond. So you get several pieces from a strip that are this shape using your ruler like so. And all the directions are in her rulers. Then you have to cut rectangles to get your side pieces. And for every rectangle, you can get 2 pieces, so you need 2 rectangles per Diamond Rex unit. And the lines are all lined up on here. You line your ruler up, cut, and you've got 2 pieces. You take 2 pieces, sew them on the 2 sides and press. So put the other 2 sides on and press. And then using her ruler, you trim it up, and you have perfect Diamond Rex units. And with virtually no waste. About the only waste you're going to have is the strips that you cut for these, and the strips that you cut for these, the ends of them that you don't use because you're not making any more units. You've got enough units and you still have 6 inches left. That, to me, necessary waste goes into the scrap heap. So that's my genius ideas. I do want to update you if you're doing the scrap fabric challenge with me. I did get to 471 blocks cut to make the 2 quilts that that number of blocks will make is the bigger one that I showed you before, number of blocks, and the smaller one, not the middle one, the 2 smalls. And that gets to 465 if I remember correctly. And so that gives me a couple extra, I'm putting things together and I see I left a salvage on a square. So that has to get tossed. So hopefully with 6 extra blocks, with pieces, losing pieces to wrong size, bad cutting, salvages in there, I should have enough to make the 2 quilts. So I told you what to cut in episode 44. So if you haven't seen episode 44 and you want to follow along with me, go back and watch that video. So after you've got all your pieces cut, the first thing you want to do is take all your 3.5-inch pieces and sew 1 1.5-inch square to it. I've got mine all done. I'm now working on the next step. And as we get them done, I will share with you where I am, and you can stay up to date and get as many blocks as you want to do. 471 is a little excessive, but that's what I had. So if you don't have as many and you want to make a smaller quilt, it's all good. Let's use those scraps. So if you liked today's video, please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, happy sewing.